John, you're the only one last week. So welcome, John. Okay, so I was going to share the screen there now, G, for this morning's presentation. Can you all see that, Jen?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the second part of the strategic planning workshop. So as we discussed last week on part one, it was all about looking at the review in terms of where your organizations were or are in terms of what you're doing and what your priorities are for 2022. So we very much kind of focused on looking at kind of needs analysis, reviewing your organization internally, reviewing what's happening outside your organization that's going to impact on what you do next year, and looking at kind of setting priorities for 2022. So this morning's workshop is focused on the next part of that. Once you've done a review of where you're at and where you want to go, what we work with our clients is in sitting down in developing their action plan then for the next 12 months or for 3 to 5 years, whatever might that be. So I sent you on a template last week for a basic Word template for a strategic plan. So I don't know if you got a chance to look at that or not. If you had looked at it and you have any questions, feel free to ask me any questions this morning, or you have my email address as well on that plan. So email me any questions you might have in relation to how to complete it if you're struggling with it. I also emailed you an Excel document that I use for action planning that we use with our clients, mostly if we're working on projects with our clients, like say capital projects where there's a number of different elements of things to do within the project. We just use that as a very kind of simple planning tool and a management tool as well. So you can download a lot of kind of like project management software. To be honest, I just use Excel for pretty much everything. It's very, very simple to use. Most of us can use it and have used it before. Some of this project management software, you spend more time trying to figure out how to use the software than understanding what the purpose of the plan is. So again, just use Excel. It's a good way of recording what you're doing, what you need to do. It's a good way of delegating work out to people. It's a good way of setting budgets and setting deadlines as well. So I'll be using that template, or I use that template a lot. And again, if you have any questions in relation to that planning template or action planning template, please let me know either this morning again or by email. So what we finished up on last week was this slide. So it's about setting your priorities. So like you can look at a 12-month plan for the next 12 months, 2022, or you might be in the process of developing a 3-year plan, or in some cases, some people are developing a 5-year strategic plan. Very rarely would we work with organizations on a 5-year plan. We would not always work with communities and villages and towns and area planning on a 5-year plan because there'd be projects there that would take that length of time. But usually for organizations, we focus on a 3-year kind of strategic planning process, just purely because things change so quickly within the sector. Funding streams come and go. And very often, if people are being core funded, they're working on a 12-month planning basis anyway, so they have to submit a business plan or strategic plan every year to their funders. But it's good to look at 3 years down the line in terms of where do we want to kind of set ourselves up to be over the next 3 years, because some things do take more than 12 months to get off the ground and deliver. So the first thing we look at, I suppose, in terms of setting looking at your objectives or your priorities. So what's your key objectives, what you want to achieve in 2022. And as I was saying last week, what's the reason for that? So what's the rationale behind it? Why are you looking to do what you're open to do? So is it based on something you feel internally that's something you should be doing, or is it based on a need that you've identified within your communities or within your client base in terms of what they want and something you need to do to provide for them? But it has to be based on some rationale, has to be some reason behind it. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste of time, and it would just draw resources from your organization that you don't need to draw from your organization. So it's really important that you look at, I suppose, in terms of when you're setting objectives and priorities for next year, that they're realistic and that they're things you need to do. Very often, organizations, they kind of go out there with kind of hoping they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they don't really know why they're doing it, and it just doesn't really work very well. It's very difficult to be to run your organization effectively and efficiently when you're just kind of going out there kind of working week from week, month to month, and that's why it's so important, as we said last week, in terms of the whole planning process. So once you have the objective set and you know why you're doing it, then you need to start setting some actions against it. So you need to start doing stuff. Again, objectives and strategies and goals and whatever on paper are only ink on paper unless you actually do something about it. So again, as I was saying last week, and I'd focus on an awful lot last week, is it has to be action focused. There has to be actions assigned to it, and that's what we're going to be focused on this morning. Is actually looking at how you develop these projects, how you develop these achieve those objectives by being action focused, and then what's the desired outcome. So what are you trying to achieve, and is desired outcome is something that is actually worthwhile. So when we're doing plans at the moment for capital projects, like large scale capital projects, there's always like within that business plan or strategic plan or feasibility study for large scale projects, we have to show like a cost benefit analysis, or we have to show like a return on investment type of analysis for if it's going to be granted through large scale government funding. We've got to go back and show where the return on investment is for the exchequer in terms of the project. And so if it's say multi-million euro project, where is that going to come back into the local economy again? So we do cost benefit analysis, we do return on investment analysis, and then a big part of what we do for social projects is socioeconomic impact. So what are the social impacts of the projects that you're looking at doing? So a lot of the work you do, there's no economic return at all. There might be some savings there in terms of the health service might save some money because you're providing supports that they should be providing. The exchequer might be saving some money because, again, the public sector aren't providing the supports, and the community managed sector providing the supports on a voluntary basis, so saving them money in terms of staffing costs, etc. So there is a small economic return, but it's not like, say, if you're creating 200 jobs, the sort of economic return would be to local community. So your focus really as not-for-profit organizations is on the social impact. And that's really, really important. So when we used to, I'm not sure if Alan's on this morning from Local Link, but when we used to rural transport evaluations years ago, so you have been involved in the rural transport in Kerry, and we were involved in Limerick and Cork as well. And we used to do evaluations, and it wasn't about how many people were on a bus, because there wasn't that many people in a lot of cases on the bus. But we looked at what the social impact was for the people that were on the bus in terms of what they were gaining, because they had no access to public transport to their local town or local village. So it was social impact in terms of they were getting to meet people, they were getting to avail of essential services that they couldn't avail of before that. But the biggest part that we recognised in rural areas in West Limerick, particularly in North Cork in particular, was the social isolation that was there before rural transport was in play. Now you can't measure that in terms of return on investment, or you can't measure in any sort of economic terms, but you can measure in terms of social impact. So that's really, really important when you're looking at developing not-for-profit projects. Some people trying to figure out, how can we show this is value for money? There might be no value for money in it, but it does really make a difference if you're providing a service to people that can't access that service anywhere. If you look at the HSE, or if you look at any government department, there's very little value for money anywhere within any publicly funded organisation. But sometimes it's not just about value for money, it's about the service being delivered on the ground. So it's really important that you look at the social impact. And when we talk about evaluations later on, we also look at the direct and indirect impacts. So again, we look at, for example, take really you're providing the transport there for Kerry Transport Services. There is the direct impact is the person who's actually getting, from Kerry to Cork, get treatment every day. But the indirect impact is their family members who don't have to take time out of work, or who aren't under pressure to have to bring that person to their treatment every day. So that's an indirect impact. So it's not just one person benefiting from it; it's the actual entire family that are benefiting from that, and also obviously the other social and emotional impacts that are included as well. So what we always look at doing is look at when you're looking at your project, look at the wider impact. Same with childcare. Everyone focuses on the number of children that are benefiting from childcare. Look at the parents that are benefiting from it, and look at the local employers that are benefiting from that. So if there's no childcare in an area, that person, what are they going to do? There's no person to mind their child. They can't take up an employment position. They can't take up a training course position. So if you're providing community childcare within a local community, you're actually benefiting the local employers. And you go to them and say, we're benefiting you, so help us fund this service we're providing for you indirectly. And again, it's just looking at the wider picture when you're looking at developing your projects and looking at the impact of your projects on the ground. A lot of people completely undersell themselves within the community environment sector. You need to start selling yourself a bit more in terms of the work you do and the impact that has on a local level. Because in a lot of cases, we're living in local areas with not a huge population. So for the persons assessing an application, and there's like 10,000 people benefiting from one application and only 1,000 from another, you would think that they're going to go to 10,000 application? Not necessarily, unless you can show what the benefit is at a local level compared to the other project. So this is the action plan template that I sent you out. And again, it's a basic template. There's nothing really spectacular with it. And it's a very simple way of managing and monitoring your projects as they progress. So the first thing is, okay, what is the objective here? What are we trying to do? And then what are the actions assigned to it? Now you can break these down into lots of small different actions, like mini projects, because otherwise you could take a project that's fairly detailed, fairly complex, might cost a lot of money, might take an awful lot of time, and it becomes just overwhelming. And what happens then is that people just get they get overwhelmed by the whole thing, and they feel they can't do it, and they get stuck in for the first while, and then they get demotivated because nothing's happening. It's because they try to take on too much at one go. So break your projects down into a number of different actions. Make sure you assign a responsibility to the actions. If there's no one assigned to an action, it's not going to happen. Okay, because no one's going to take responsibility. No one's accountable. It just won't happen. If you're calling a monthly meeting where you're reviewing what happened in the previous month, and you've assigned a piece of work to someone within that committee, if they haven't done, they've got to say at the meeting why they hadn't done, and what the reason was. If there's no one assigned to it, you're looking around the table at 10 people or 5 people, whatever it might be, and everyone's like, well, I wasn't responsible for it. I wasn't responsible for it. It doesn't get done. So assign responsibility. Don't assign responsibility to a person not there. Ask them, are they able to do it? Can they do it? Have they an interest in doing it? So we always look at, in our project teams, we assign responsibility to projects and actions to people that are best positioned to deliver on it. Okay. So for example, if it's a funding project and we need someone to look at a tender brief for construction or contractors, and we're all looking sure none of us an idea about construction, we'll identify someone that's on the committee or someone we can bring in to advise us on putting together a tender brief. Okay, we just won't try and do it. We'll see if there's anyone there we can find that's going to be responsible for doing it. If there's resources required, work out what the resources are. If it's only time and there's no budget assigned to it, that's fine. But if there's budget required, work out what that budget is. You might be guess the budget. You might kind of work out. You might know exactly what it's going to cost. You might make a few calls to see what it's going to cost. If there's a cost associated with it, then look at the sources of funding. How can we fund this? If you can't find a source of funding to fund that action, it just won't happen. Okay. So if you don't have a certain person responsible, you don't know where you're going to get the money to do it, it won't happen. Set a deadline as well. Now, the deadlines might be enforced on you. So if it's a grant application, for example, and you're working out who's going to be doing what in terms of putting the application together, that deadline is going to be enforced in terms of there's a deadline for the grant to get in. And again, it's important to be able to work to those deadlines. So there's no point in saying, look, we meet next month. If the grant that you're applying for that's crucial to the project you're working on or the action is in 2 weeks' time. Okay, that's a complete waste of time. I'm not saying you meet every day, but sometimes you might meet weekly if there's a fairly fast deadline approaching for a project. You might want to meet more than maybe some people meet once a month. That doesn't really work for a lot of projects. And then finally, put on what your performance indicator is, and that basically means in terms of how do you measure was it successful or not. Okay, so we spend a lot of time with our clients working out this, and we go into a fair amount of detail. Now, what we tend to do is we end up having maybe 4 or 5 pages of actions, which is an awful lot. So then we start combining actions in together. So we look at in terms of we look at what can we combine, what actions are similar that we can combine to one. And what I'm trying to do is basically get the actions down to maybe 5 or 6 different actions to work on. Otherwise, the skin becomes overwhelming, and it just won't happen. Okay, so I was going to show you an example of one, just a simple example of what I mean by this. So for example, we're working on a project, a couple of different projects at the moment where we're working with communities who have existing facilities, but they're not just up to scratch anymore. They're not big enough. They're old and falling down, and we're working with them on a feasibility study. So their objective was, let's say, to increase their capacity within the centre by the end of 2023. Okay, so they want to build an extension in one case. The first thing they needed to do in terms of an action was to secure funding to carry out a feasibility study and design. So they needed to find someone who was going to do the study and do the initial concept designs for them. So they looked at how do we do that. So they put together a building project committee, which I think there's 4 people involved in it. They identified a consultant, which was me. They approached me and asked would I be interested in doing it. I said I would. They asked me for an approximate budget based on bringing in engineers, architects, whatever. So they knew what the resources were required. So the budget was roughly about 10,000 plus VAT to get concept designs and surveys done of the existing building and to put together a report at the end of it. I told them they would need 10% matching funds. They would need 100% bridging finance to cover the grant, so that they spend the money first and then draw down the 90% of it. They applied to leader funding, which they secured and got 90% funding approved. So they were looking at, say, the next grant deadline for them is January 2022. Okay, so a performance indicator for them would be the grant would be applied for and approved. Okay, so what they did was they basically assigned one person to track down me to get them to get help with putting this together and with help in terms of identifying where the funding might be. Okay, the next part of that project then, which is starting, is they've complete a study, design, and project costings. That's the next action. Again, the project committee is going to be involved as the client, and they work hand in hand in with the consultant, which would be me, and with the architect and an engineer. Again, the budget's the same, and the funding is secured. Then the next phase is they need to go off and they need to secure funding for the actual construction of the project. Okay, so again, who's responsible? The building project committee is responsible. They now need to look at a fundraising committee because now they're looking at raising, substantial money. Okay, so the first thing is they'll do is they'll expand this project committee to include people that are going to be responsible for fundraising. They might be separate groups, but they work hand in hand in terms of these guys will organise and identify the project costs, and this team here will look at where we get the money from. So again, the resources required, that they need to be identified, so they'll go out to tender with the planning drawings, etc. The potential source of funding, which will be identified in the report, would be rural regeneration development fund, leader funding, other funding they might be announced, fundraising and sponsors. The deadline is going to be based on grants. Okay, so that project might take 3 years. Okay, and then the performance indicator will be that this funding is secured. Okay, so they can't put in exact deadlines because it's pretty much unknown with a lot of these in terms of when they're going to be announced, but they can start working on it pretty much straight away. Then, like you know, this would be large scale projects, and this could go on for a number of years, but the same committee stay in place, being supported by external consultants and engineers and architects, and your design team during the construction phase. But they will stay in place pretty much until the building is opened. What normally would happen there is that the building committee, in this case, would bring in external people on a voluntary basis that have specific skills around maybe finance, construction, engineering. So in this case, they're brought in a retired architect who's advising them on the project, and he's keeping an eye on the design team in terms of what they're doing and making sure that they're not, that there's no one being kind of, I suppose, but just that there's someone within the committee that's kind of keeping an eye on things and making sure that the consultants on the other side are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Another type of just more of a kind of a simpler, I suppose, well, not simpler, but less complex and less timely objective might be to increase the volunteer base. So again, we're working with groups at the moment who are looking to increase their volunteer base, or they're trying to recruit new volunteer directors onto the board. Okay, so what's happening there is basically, again, the actions, they need to identify people with key skills, either finance, legal, health and safety. There should be an equal gender balance as well. So a lot of groups we work with, there's not an equal gender balance, which needs to be addressed. And we work with them in terms of how to address that and how to identify people in the community who will come on board. So normally that would be the coordinator's responsibility if there's a coordinator or manager in place and the board. Okay, so that sometimes groups come to us and say, can you identify people for us, Tom? Can you help us, get people onto our board? I don't, because it's like, basically, trying to recruit someone in terms of a staff member. Yeah, you might work with a third party to identify people through a recruitment agency, but you're the people that have to actually interview the person that you're going to be working with them. So, there's usually enough people within a group or an organization that knows people, that has personal contacts with people that can maybe encourage them to come on board and to get involved. So the resource that we required here would be time. and a potential source of funding. It's not applicable. There's no cost involved in this, just time. And then you set deadlines. So you set deadlines. Say, okay, from January to March, we're going to identify, a minimum of 2 people that are going to come on board, either as directors or come on board as members of a committee, with the view that long term they'll come on board as directors of the company. So what we would normally do there is we would say, okay, let's say there's 10 people on the board or 10 people on the management committee. We'd ask them all to go home and to identify people they know that have got key skills. Either they know directly or they know people that know someone. And then you come back with that list of people and say, okay, we've 10, 15 names here. Who's best positioned to go there and track them, and target them and approach them? Now, you also got to be, when you're going to approaching someone to come on board as a committee member or as a board member of an organization, you've got to go there with a bit much of a sales pitch in terms of, encouraging them to come on board. Because if someone comes up to you and they come to me a lot and say, Tom, can you get involved in our organization? The first thing you say is, you think of excuses not to. You think, okay, I'm too busy, or I don't have time, or, I'm involved in too many other projects, or whatever it might be. So you're trying like any salesperson, you're trying to kind of, think about what are the objections going to be thrown up here, and see, how can we get around it. But you're trying to identify people that have an interest in the project you're working in, okay? Whether it be personal interest in it or just, a professional interest in it. You got to look at someone that might say this might, better their own career or better their own business in terms of building a network. So you've got to identify someone. And the key thing is that when you're trying to get new volunteers on board or new volunteer directors on board, the key thing is to give me time. So you try to play down how much time is involved, okay? So the classic one that I would have, and I would go to, groups that come to me looking for my support on a voluntary basis, like the Parents' Council or the Board of Management in the local national school. And I would say, look, I don't have time to go to meetings. I can't commit to meetings because I do work at night time, and I just won't have time, and I won't be letting you down. But I can get involved in terms of I can be involved in a phone call or an email, or if you need support for a specific project, I'll get involved in that. Okay, so that's a way of getting people involved. They don't have to necessarily go to loads of meetings. They don't have to necessarily get involved in fundraising or any other things that we feel are kind of time consuming if you get involved in a not-for-profit organization. You're just basically using them for and using is the wrong word to use, for their skills and their expertise, and and sometimes their professional and their business and their career networks as well, and contacts. And sometimes you'd just be brutally honest and say, look, we know that you got these specific skills. We need help with something. Can you come on board for a very short period of time? Come on board a project team, just advise us. And once this piece of work is done, that's it, you're gone. Now, sometimes people get involved in projects on a one-off basis and they stay with it because they like the work the organization does. That's really important. If someone thinks they're going to be in there for the long haul and going to be stuck in committees for the rest of their life and dealing with stuff, and being a volunteer and, just thinking this is going to take up all my time, I don't have much spare time as it is, they won't get involved. So always have an exit kind of for them. So if it's project-based, it gets them involved just for maybe a specific project. So for example, a lot of graphic designers, web designers, marketing consultants will get involved in a project just for a specific period of time to assist them with a specific thing, and then they're gone. Sometimes they might stay on and work on other projects with them, okay? So again, just look in terms of when you're setting actions, that's what you do. You say, okay, on this template, the responsibility here is done as coordinator board. Start naming people. Right, Tom, someone here, can you do this? Yeah, so you write down the note on the template. Tom's going to contact 4 people, and he's going to come back to us within the next 2 weeks with their answers. Carolyn's going to contact 4 people she knows. She's going to come back to us in 2 weeks' time with answers in terms of whether they're involved or not. So you give people responsibility, and then they come back and say, look, I talked to 4 people, they have no interest whatsoever, but I found another person who has. Okay, so you make sure the work gets done, and that's why it's so important. And it's like it's kind of common sense stuff, but it's really important that you actually commit stuff to paper and things get done. Because if you're at a meeting and you've got an action plan in front of you like this, and you've assigned people to do some work, they're responsible for it and they're accountable for it. So it's like you work for a company and you're head of department, or you're a manager of a department, or just working within the department, and you have a team meeting, let's say once a week, and you come back to every team meeting with nothing done, you're kind of going, you're not going to come back to, every week say, I did nothing this week either, I'll come back to this next week. Your job is to get something done. So give people responsibility and make them accountable. Okay, so that's the action template. Again, I use it in Excel because in Excel you can just, you can expand out on this as much as you want. You can also start, putting in, budgets here. You can put in another column for budgets and maybe budget versus actual. And you can put in as much detail as you want to put in there. If you're good at Excel, you can start, setting kind of deadlines and timelines and have, kind of using kind of management tools within it as well to track things, or just keep it fairly simple like this, a simple, template. But it is very, very important that you set actions against each objective. Very, very important. If you don't, you might as well forget about it because this won't happen. Okay, so in terms of implementation, and so in implementing the action plan, and again, as I said to you last week, we write and we have written an awful lot of strategic plans over the years. And, unless there's someone there at the end of the process that's actually going to take the plan and run with it, nothing happens. So we're doing a bit of work at the moment with SD, Community Development Association. And they were just awarded there recently with an award for their community plan that Paula Raw and Brendan O'Keefe did. It's a very, very good community plan. But the best thing about the plan is that they have a very, very strong group and a very strong committee that actually go off and do stuff, right? So they're already implementing. Now, bear in mind that this was just launched just before COVID, right? So most people are using COVID as an excuse not to do anything over the last 2 years, which is fine. But these guys, they got off their backside and they said, okay, we've got projects here. The community said they want it. We've got actions here. We've got recommendations here from the consultants saying this is what the community want. This is what we should do. And two of those actions, one was to develop their community centre and one was to develop a river walk. And they've secured grant aid to do both of them. Pretty much straight away after the plan was launched, they went out there and said, right, what are the first big ticket items that we need to tackle here? And they got secure funding for it. And both of those studies are going to be completed. One's done already, and one is going to be completed by the end of December, probably early January, which means they're going to be in position next year to start looking at funding to raise to get those projects off the ground. Okay, it happened not because the plan was really, really good, which it was, but any plan can be really good and look fantastic, but unless there's actually people that are going to drive on with the actual recommendations, it just won't happen. So the first thing is you need to have a proper structure. Hugely important, because if you're not well structured, not only will you not be able to do anything properly, effectively, efficiently, but you won't get the support of external funders to support you in your projects, because pretty bluntly, they won't trust you. Okay, so a lot of the issues at the moment with funding is that even though the projects on the ground that are being developed or being proposed to be developed are very worthwhile, very much needed, maybe well costed, there's just a doubt about the ability of the group that are behind it to actually, deliver on it. Okay, so it's like, again, I always use the analogy of grant days and getting a grant to buy a bus. There's no point giving someone a grant to buy a bus and they buy the bus if there's no one able to drive the bus. You just got a very, fancy, expensive bus sitting on a driveway, but no one can drive it. So the key thing when any organization is funding you is they want to be confident that you as an organization are able to drive the project. And the most important thing from them really is, and this is maybe I'm being cynical here or not, I don't know, but maybe I'm being unfair, but like their most important thing for them from a departmental point of view is the money is spent properly and is accounted for properly, and that there's good reporting back. Okay, yeah, they do care about, is their work on the ground being done right, and do people benefit from it, and is there a good social dividend, blah blah blah, and there's good impact there. But really, their role is to basically manage and administer the funding. That's all they're doing. They're giving up money, getting reports back in, see was the money spent properly. So if you're a civil servant working in a government department, and I've been on the other side, I've been where Caroline's been. I've been working with local development companies, assessing applications, being responsible for administering funding. You want to work with people who kind of are good at administration, well organized, gets the paperwork back in correctly. In other words, makes your life easier. Okay. If you're working with an organization who's kind of all over the place, they're lovely people to deal with. They're really solid. My God, they're a disaster when it comes to admin. You're probably thinking, do I need a headache of having to chase these people every single day for stuff like for a piece of paper, or you're getting paperwork and it's not right, and you go back to them and come back second time, it's still not right, and third time it's still not right. you kind of, no matter how good the people are and how sound they are, you're going to say, look, it's just easier to deal with the other group because they're just easier to deal with. So structure is really important. And it's probably one of the areas where most organizations are weak. They're brilliant at what they do on the ground. They're really good at delivering the service they're supposed to deliver. They're really good at working with people. They're really good community people. But you need to have someone there as well that's good on the administration side of things and good on not so much business side, but definitely on the financial side. Because as you know, it's getting so bureaucratic. It's getting more and more complex when it comes to drawing down grant aid and paperwork and compliance and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really where you need to find people that can come on board that love this stuff. People love Excel, people love administration, and they mightn't be overly worried about community and work on the ground, but they just like the other side of it. And you need one of those. You need someone that's interested in that side of it. Committee structures. I know we all kind of glaze over when we hear of committees, or we kind of run to the hills from here, about a committee being set up and we want to, we're asked to sit on it. And like I've been on God knows how many committees at this stage of my life, and sometimes you can lose the will to live with some of them because they just don't do anything. They're just literally talk shops, and you do kind of say, why are we meeting? Like when you see an agenda for a meeting, it's the same agenda basically, pretty much like cut and paste every week for a meeting. That's problem. That means nothing's happening. If I'm going on any committee, and I don't go on committees much now in terms because in a private capacity, I do as obviously in my professional capacity. There has to be actions after every meeting. So if you've got a committee, there's got to be actions there in terms of what are we going to do, why are we here, what's the next thing we're going to do, and what we're going to achieve by the next time we sit down and meet. And if they're not in place, then there's no point. It's only waste time, and people get really, really, really frustrated if they keep going back to meeting after meeting after meeting and nothing's happening. It's just something that we're very good at Ireland, in terms of from government down. We like to form a committee to solve any problem we have, and sometimes, you bring in loads of people and nothing happens. I'm a great believer in setting up teams. I don't like using the word committees anymore. I call them teams because they tend to get more action focused. But again, that team might be just like, 2 people. It doesn't have to be like 10 people. Don't, keep it small, keep it simple. Staff, again, is something in terms of how do we actually implement this in terms of the operational side on the ground? Do we have staff? We mightn't have. Do we have volunteers? If we don't, do we have enough volunteers that you do this work on the ground? If you're developing a project and you just don't have the human resources to deliver on it, there's no point doing it. Okay. If a small group of people try to take on a big project, they're going to get burnt out before that project's completed. Now they might start thinking, sure, if we start this now, we get loads to join us down the way. So they start running, hoping people start following them. They look behind them a mile down the road, there's no one following them. But now they're into it and they can't get back out of it and they're stuck in it for life. If you don't have the human resources at the outset, or you don't see a way of getting them on board, then that human resource, in most cases, is volunteers. Don't start it. Okay. It's kind of like, we'll build it and they'll come sort of scenario. That doesn't happen in reality. Okay, so funding. Yeah, absolutely. No, not every project requires funding. Most do, but not every project does. So, again, if it's a project like a capital-based project, construction project, a large-scale project is going to require a good bit of operational funding, staff, resources, time, energy. Again, if you don't think you can fund that and you can't see any identifiable source funding to fund it, don't start it. Okay. Again, a lot of people they'll drive on with a project, not knowing how they're going to actually fund it. It's like going to the airport on holidays with nothing in your back pocket. Hopping on a plane, hoping I'll find money somewhere to get there to pay for the hotel. It's insane. But groups do it the whole time. They go off and they drive on with a project with zero money behind it, no matching funding. A lot of groups come to us looking for funding or looking to do feasibility studies for them. And I said, look, if you get a grant, which is fantastic, you got to pay for that funding money up front. You got to pay the consultants up front, where you're getting the money from. And we don't have any money, so they have to borrow it. Then you go to Clan-Credo to borrow. Clan-Credo is such a repayment capacity. We don't have a repayment capacity. So just like, it's like going in to buy a car and you don't have any money and you go to bank and they say, I can't repay it. You're not going to get the money. So if you can't start this because you don't have the resources to do it, or you don't have any access to funding to do it, or potential access to funding to do it, there's no point in doing it. Okay, so the structures then. So some of you might be operating, mostly operating as companies limited by guarantee without share capital, or CLG. But there's groups out there that are still operating under a constitution, which is basically just outlining what the rules are, their aims of their organization are, the roles and responsibilities. So it's a very simple constitution. There's tons of them out there online. There's good templates out there from the charities regulator in terms of how you word your constitution if you're trying to get charitable status. But the majority of you will be either now companies limited by guarantee, or down the line, most projects move into CLG kind of status, because you can need to be for public funding these days. So you'll have a voluntary board of directors, and those directors will have responsibilities. Now, again, we will be doing workshops in the new year on governance, and we'll be bringing in people who specialize in company formation for not-for-profit organizations, who specialize in governance, and who specialize in the governance code and the regulatory requirements. And they'll be outlining what the kind of roles and responsibilities of directors are from a legal point of view. And that can be a bit daunting for people, because they might be aware of their responsibilities as directors, but it's really important when you're looking at structuring your organization, that you look at the directors and look at their, have you got the right people on board? Do you need to expand your board? Do you need to bring in people with specific skills? In my opinion, every board of directors should have at least someone that has finance experience. They don't necessarily be an auditor or an accountant, but someone's that's got either financial administration experience or accounts experience, that knows how to read a set of accounts, who understands returns, who understands just has that knows enough about finance and financial implications for companies. It's the one area that an awful lot of organizations fall down on. It's one area where they pay an awful lot of fees for accountancy fees, not because accountants rip people off. It's because accountants are asked to do way more for not-for-profit organizations than they are for for-profit organizations. And a lot of the voluntary organizations don't have people internally that have financial experience, so they're reliant on their accountant, and they give everything over to their accountant to do, which is fine, but it's going to cost you an awful lot of money. By getting someone on board that can actually assist you in terms of putting systems and processes in place, will reduce that cost to you, because you can do an awful lot of this administration and bookkeeping and record keeping yourselves. But some people just don't know how to do it, and they can shy away from it. They get worried about it and hand it over to an accountant to do for them. In some cases, we would see organizations, instead of going to their accountants, they would hire in a bookkeeper, maybe one day a week, to look after their accounts for them. A lot cheaper than paying an accountant at the end of the year to handle all the kind of basic bookkeeping and administration tasks. Depending on the organization, again, if health and safety is a big issue within your organization, so if you've got a premises, if you're working with young people, vulnerable people, again, when it comes to insurance, when it comes into public funding, you need to look at the whole area of health and safety and compliance. Again, that can be costly if you're bringing in people constantly to do that for you. Again, you'd be looking at someone there that's maybe some experience in that area or has knowledge of it, okay, that can advise you on it. In some cases, if you have an organization where you've a number of staff, and some organizations do, they're funded, core funded through social enterprise projects or employment-led initiatives. Again, maybe having someone with some sort of HR experience on board as well that can advise on employment contracts, responsibilities, employers, things like that would be useful as well. Now, in most cases there, when it gets to kind of the serious end of the game, you would bring in your experts and pay them to do a lot of that work. But it's good to have someone on board that knows what the consultant's doing for you. And the same as I said earlier on in terms of construction projects, you might have someone there with construction experience or engineering or design experience on a full-time capacity, but bring them in to support you with when you're working with external consultants, just to make sure they're keeping an eye on things that's happening. So again, and then you've got some companies we work will bring in retired maybe executives from companies, people that have started and ran successful businesses, have a good bit of management experience, or project management experience, and they've now retired and have time on their hands, and they come in and bring in their expertise. Just be small but careful with that in some cases that type of person who's really, really good might come in and start taking ownership because they have the skills, they have the knowledge, and they just mightn't have the community side of it in their head. And they might go like, head on, let's build and develop and expand and let's go global sort of thing. And they're like, we just want to look after people in our community. You need to kind of find that kind of balance there with someone that has, the business kind of enterprise kind of financial skills, but also understands why you're there in the first place. You're not trying to, run a for-profit organization to make loads of money. They need to be conscious of the social objectives as well. The chartered regulator, who kind of, I suppose, basically caused an awful lot of people, an awful lot of pain for people over the last number of years, have taken with the old governance code, which you're probably familiar with, that we all did training on, and I've delivered loads of training on it in the past, which was a kind of a self regulated code of governance, which was a complete and utter waste of time because nothing ever happened with it. And then when the chartered regulator was formed, they kind of just basically scrapped it. And then the chartered regulator came up with their own code, which is kind of similar to it. But the governance code that we're all familiar with, the three types of organizations that were around for a while, and we all had to sign up to it, and we all can tick a box and we sign up to the governance code. That was a disaster of a process. The regulator one, that's got teeth. The regulator has teeth. They do kind of regulate, whereas the other one was, as I said, was kind of self-regulating, which was never going to work. There was an awful lot of work involved in getting your house in order to comply with the regulator's code of governance. Okay, an awful lot of work involved in it. However, and I say this to all my groups, if you do it right, it's a really good process to follow because it is complex and it is time consuming. But once you've kind of done everything you possibly can do to meet all their requirements, you're pretty much have a very, very, very solid foundation there for your organization, okay? And you ticked all the boxes pretty much for every single funding application going forward, because they'll all ask on the funding applications, they'll all ask about your governance and how you govern your organization. If you put in a one-liner saying that we're fully compliant with the chartered regulator code of governance and we report to the chartered regulator annually each year and we're audited by them, that gives them peace of mind and comfort because now you've got an external regulator keeping an eye on you. That's why last number of years, you kind of need to be kind of company limited by guarantee to get funding. And the reason for that was that a company limited by guarantee, there's no hiding place there. You're doing a report to, you're audited by revenue, you're being monitored by your accountant, your information is publicly available through the company's registration office. In other words, if they want to do some background checks on you, they can, okay? But there's also two external auditors that are looking after you, and that would be the revenue and your accountant, okay? Chartered regulator is another layer of audit. So if you're signed up to the regulator and you are an approved charity, and you're doing the annual returns to the regulator, and you're doing annual returns to revenue, and you're audited, that gives serious amount of comfort to the and confidence to the person who's going to be funding you. So there's a lot of work involved in it. We would always say to people, spend 2-3 months working hard on this, get it done. Once it's done, it doesn't have to be redone every single year. You just basically keep an eye on it and you adjust it when required. Your policies and procedures won't change dramatically each year. So the big piece of work is putting those policies and procedures together at the very beginning. They don't really change much from year to year. You just basically review them. If there's changes to be made, you make those changes, you sign off on those changes at your board meeting, and you move on. It needs to be board of directors and board of management driven. This is really important, really, really important. So if any of you are on boards of management, this is not the responsibility of a coordinator. It's not the responsibility of a manager. It's the responsibility of the board. The board are in charge. They're governing the organization, not the manager, not the coordinator. Therefore, the board have to take responsibility for it. I've had arguments with both directors and coordinators over this many, many times over the last number of years. And I point blankly say to the coordinator, this is not your problem. This is the board's problem. They need to do it. They can't pass the buck to you because ultimately, if anything goes wrong, the coordinator is not going to be the one that's going to be up over it. It's going to be the board of directors. The coordinator can move on to another job. If there's an issue, in relation to health and safety, insurance, governance, misappropriation of funding, anything like that, it's not the coordinator, it's the board of directors. It's the director who's legally responsible. So therefore, they need to make sure they're aware of it. Most board of directors, they're volunteers. They don't have time. They don't want to get involved in this sort of stuff. That's what they signed up to. So they have to do it. No, the coordinator and manager can assist them. Absolutely. You can bring in a facilitator to the system. Absolutely. But it needs to be driven by them. It can't be just passed over where a coordinator and manager is told, right, look, we heard about, we're on a meet, our training session here with Tom O'Leary. He said we need to have these policies and procedures in place because the regulators said we know nothing about it. Can you go off and sort this and come back in and tell us it's done? That's not how this works. It has to be done by the board, okay? And I know you'll have arguments with them over it, but it's just the reality. They're responsible for governing. They have to do this. So in terms of the organizational structure, this looks like your typical organizational chart, and people they don't like when they see organizational charts because it looks too corporate, it looks too business-like, it looks too hierarchical, but it's really important to get an overview in terms of where your organization is, right? You might know exactly what's happening within your organization. You might know exactly the roles and responsibilities of everyone within the organization, who does what, who's responsible for what. The person who's sitting at a desk assessing your application, looking at your strategic plan, a company that's going to give you money as a sponsor or a partner, they have no idea how your organization is structured. They might have a first idea about how a not-for-profit organization works, and they understand structure within their organization, so you give it back to them. So this is just a sample that I use. Now, again, you can design your own one, obviously. So you have a voluntary board of directors here. And I would always recommend at least 2 committees, right? We're going to talk about that in a second. The first is an executive committee. The first is the executive committee, and the second is a fundraising committee. And then I've got what's on here is project committees. And these could be one-off project committees, or they could be ongoing projects, right? So you might have, let's say if this was a sports organization, or sports club, you'd have an executive, you'd have a fundraising committee, you'd have maybe a field committee, you'd have a coaching committee, you'd have, if they have a clubhouse, you might have a clubhouse or bar committee, and they're all responsible for running different elements of the club and the organization, okay? So you can expand on these project committees as much as you want. And then you've got these, what we call special project committees, and these are one-off committees that are formed, or teams that are formed to develop specific projects, okay? And once the project is done, they're gone, right? So you might have worked in companies in the past, in the private sector or in the not-for-profit sector or in the community volunteer sector, where there might be specific grants coming up that they take this training links as an example that the PPN applied for under the wheel. That's a specific project. The money was applied for, the program was put together, trainers were appointed, the training will be completed, the training course will be evaluated, and then job done. So that training links committee is then disbanded because that project is over. There was a pilot project, the funding's gone. And it might happen again next year, the year after, and it's re-established in that committee, but it's a very one-off project. So you can have special project committees. And normally what we would recommend there is your representative from the board that is interested in, this is really important, interested in that actual project. Not someone's being told to go on a committee because they're the only one left to run the room. They need to bring their passion to it and their experience to it. And that's why they're there. The coordinator, if there's a coordinator in place, needs to sit on it. And unfortunately, the coordinator needs to sit on most committees because they're the link between the board and the staff. And then you bring in, and it's where you bring your external advisors. And this is a really good way of bringing in new volunteers because you're asking them to get involved in a specific project, which I said earlier on. Okay, they're coming on board. So people may, Tom, can you get involved in this project? This is a start date, this is a finish date. We won't be bothering you with anything else. I'll get involved in something like that because I can give my time to it because I know there's an exit at the end of it, okay? It's not like, this is going to go on forevermore. So the external advisor is brought on board with specific experience around that specific project. So we were involved there in an organization in the last couple of years, and they were applying for funding from Pubble that was going to allow them to recruit new tutors. And it was one-off, but we were looking at the type of tutors and the type of programs we could develop. So we actually got on board a person who had done something similar up the country. And we asked them to come down, or they asked them to come down to meet with the board for a number of hours to advise them in terms of what they should do and how they should approach this project. So that person wasn't paid to come down and advise them. It was another project that was very successful in the country, and they came down, but they were coming down as an external person on a voluntary capacity to advise this group in terms of what way they should progress with the project. Saved them a lot of time, saved them a lot of energy. It meant that they knew exactly what they were going for, put a very good program together, and secured funding for it. Now that project that team is gone because the funding is in place. It's now part of the wider operations of the company. There might be a manager and coordinator in place. If there is, brilliant, because they're the link. A lot of organizations won't have any funding for staff, so therefore there's no one employed to manage and coordinate. In that situation, there's got to be someone within the executive here or within the board that's going to take on that kind of a role. There's got to be someone kind of in charge that's responsible. Now, in most cases with a voluntary board, that's the chairperson kind of takes on, assumes that role. That's fine. Again, I rather see someone that can give more time to us. So if that chairperson can, perfect. If that chairperson can't, then another person needs to be assigned to taking on that kind of coordination role. They're not a manager, they're more just coordinating things and being the link. So let's say in this situation, you have a manager coordinator. Again, if you're recruiting managers or coordinators, I know some of you are in a management and coordination role. Again, you're looking for someone that has a bit of both. They understand the whole social objective, the community element of it, but also understand that this is an organization that's to be run like a business. Okay, so we've got responsibilities, we got funding, we've got staffing issues, we've got all these things going on. So that they've got they might be more focused on community and social. That's fine, but they need to have some element of understanding around that we need to run this as an organization or as a business. What you don't want is someone that has all business experience and they don't get the whole social objectives. Or someone that's got all the community experience in the world, but just doesn't get kind of admin and we're running this as a business. We need to kind of drive it on and need to be strategic around it. I think that you can take someone with a community and voluntary background, which all of us have, and you can provide them with the skills and the training to get them thinking more business-like in terms of running the organization, or they would employ people that have good financial experience to work in the administration roles. I think it's easier to upskill someone from the running the organization from a business perspective than it is to do the opposite. I don't think you can actually train someone that's completely business-led and kind of for-profit focused and runs big organizations and understands all that, to get them understanding community and the social side of it. In my opinion, in my experience. But what I've seen coordinators work really well in the past is where they have both. They've got both skill sets. Primarily more focused on the community and social side. That's why they're in this sector, but have a knowledge of and a bit of cop on when it comes to the business side of it as well. This person then is responsible for, if there's volunteers only, managing the volunteers, and if there's staff and volunteers, managing the staff. So with the staff, you might have direct employees, and you might have people on employment schemes, so like rural source schemes or TOOS or CE. And then another area where people don't really tend to take much notice or don't really kind of avail of is student placement and graduate placements. There's an awful lot of college courses locally in MTU and in Limerick and other places where, and in the KCFE where they're doing courses in, say, social studies or community-based courses or just business courses or marketing courses. Or even like social media or media studies, that you can bring people on board and that will give you support with your projects. I know a good few organizations now are bringing in, say, media studies students who are helping them with, say, doing video for their projects, doing case study work, and they're doing video for their case studies, or helping with their social media, or helping them kind of with their graphic design or their websites. We've other groups who work with then who bring graduates on the administration side of it, so they help out with administration, putting together databases, things like that. Now it is very short term, but and sometimes if you get the wrong student in place, you could spend more time kind of coaching them and showing them what doing things. But I think really, from our experience working with student placements and graduates over the years, some very good ones out there. And you can pay them if you're able to, or they just do kind of a free work placement. But get them in. I know 3 students that I know personally who would have done placements within organizations within the community sector who are now working within the sector. They actually, they started their careers within the sector because they just liked the work they were doing while they were working there. So again, it's important to look at, if you don't have money for staff, how do we bring in people that, we need to have someone working for part-time, full-time, we can't pay them. How else can we do it? Volunteers are obviously the bedrock of what we do within the sector. It's really important that those volunteers are recruited properly, they're managed properly, and they're rewarded properly, and that they're given meaningful roles and responsibilities within the organization, and they're also given opportunities to get involved in the strategic planning side of it and involved in the actual overall planning for the organization as well. So not just being brought in as volunteers to do kind of tasks without getting any sort of reward or any recognition. Get them involved. And then finally, within every organization, you need to look at the external support. Okay, and this is something that a lot of organizations don't do. I don't know why, but if we're putting down an organizational chart to this and a strategic plan, we really focus on the external support part of it, because again, that gives serious comforts to the person who's funding you, because they know that you're being supported or advised or at least directed by professionals within the space. Okay, so your external support that you should be availing of would be, you won't have to, if you've got a company limited by guarantee, you have to have a company accountant. Your company accountant, in most cases, whether it be for-profit or not-for-profit companies, they're the people you bring your books to at the end of the year or in October, and they do the company return to revenue for you. They might come to your AGM to give a report on the financials, and that's all you see of them. Unless there's a problem, you call them, and that's it. Use your company accountant more, okay? They've been paid a lot of money, and I know I work with two accountants locally, and I know many more. I have no problem saying this. You need to use your accountants an awful lot more, okay? You're paying them a fee every year. You need to go to them and say, look, we're paying you a fee every year. Let's say it might be €2,500, €3,500, in some cases more. For that, they need to get something back in return. We're not going to, don't ask them, you can ask them for money for sponsorship if you're doing a project like that, and they might sponsor a golf classic or something, right? But what you want is them to for them to give some time back to you in lieu of what you're paying them, right? So to sit down with you and just go through your accounts, go through your how you're reporting, how you're recording, all this sort of stuff, right? They also need to advise you on things like, say, your tax position, if you're applying for charitable status, to advise you on those things. Okay. Now they will say, well, we're going to charge you more for that because it's extra work. I'd be going back to them and saying, look, we're giving you X amount of money every year. This is something you can give back to us now. Okay, negotiate with them. And no one does. Very, very few organizations negotiate with professionals that they're paying money for. I get the whole time. I do a lot of work with groups. Some groups I work with have no problem coming back to me saying, Tom, you did work there for us last year. Can you come up and meet us? I'm not going to charge them for that because they give me plenty of money the previous year, right? If I'm going to somewhere, look, I'm charging out to go up and talk to you, I've now burnt that bridge with that client. I'm never going to see that client again. They'll come near me for work again. Okay, so I don't charge them for it. But if, say, you are being charged for it, say, hang on a second, we're going to give you plenty of money. This one you can do for free. Okay, use their expertise, right? Use their knowledge. Same with legal support, HR companies. There's loads of them around. Talk to them and get support off them. If I'm working as a legal professional, solicitor, barrister, whatever, if I'm working in HR, if I'm working in marketing, business development, whatever it is, and an organization comes to me saying, look, you might give us some advice on this, I give them advice for free. Why? Because I know down the line they're going to work out of it. There'll always be work out of it because I know they'll get money somewhere down the line to pay someone to actually provide the support for them. Okay, so we do an awful lot of work with that. We do not a lot of work where we go and provide advice, information. We don't charge for it because we know down the line they'll either work directly for us or they work indirectly for us. Don't be afraid of asking for help for nothing. Okay, there's no reason why you shouldn't be, because if they don't want to, they don't want to. There's plenty of other professionals out there that will provide the support for you. The support agencies, so like Northeast West Care Development, South Care Development Partnership, utilize their experience and their expertise as well, right? They're all paid to support you. Use it. Don't be afraid to ask for support. Don't be afraid to ask for help. If they can't provide the support for you, where can they get the support for you? Where can they go to? Where can they direct you to get those supports? The funding agencies, okay, the people who are funding you, again, they're there to make sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to do right. Use them as well. Ask them questions, get advice off them, get direction from them, everything like that. Don't feel that you're kind of out there operating independently and you've no idea what you're doing, you can't get support. There's an awful lot of information out there, and use it. And this might cost you money down the line. Try to get as much free information as you possibly can at the beginning. Okay, and don't be afraid. As I said, if you're looking for support from a company out there, give them the impression that they're going to get work all this down the line. Okay, if they play the cards right, they will. Okay, and that's me. And I'm being brutally honest with you. That's what I've done since 2005. You don't advertise, you don't market, I don't use social media, I don't use any of those things. We go out there, we advise people for free, and we get work out of it afterwards. That's so get other professionals in whatever sector it is, in lots of different areas to do it. I know that some of you got web designers in the past that are doing websites on for you as part of they're sponsoring that for you. Brilliant. They know they're going to get publicity, they're going to get marketing, they're going to get return on from that as well, because they'll be recommended by each other people. Use it. It's part of marketing. It's part of building your networks. Most companies, if they've got NCOP on, will support local projects because they get return from it anyway. So this kind of structure we would recommend. Again, if you don't like using an organizational chart because it's very kind of hierarchical or whatever, that's fine. It's a good way of presenting how your organization works to someone externally. It's also a good way of identifying for yourselves as well where there's gaps. Because sometimes, let's see if I can highlight this. What happens is, and you know this more than I do because you're mostly in coordination and management roles, the whole organizational structure is here. The entire organization is scaffolded on this one person, right? Problem with that is, if you take this person out of it, the entire organization falls flat in its face because everything went through one person. That one person knew what was going on, had control, was the only person that knew where things were filed away, the only person that had contacts and telephone numbers, the only person that knew how to turn on the lights in the building, who paid insurance, who was the insurance broker. That person gets another job, walks away, gets seriously ill, or gets burnt out. The organization, the scaffolding comes down, it all collapses in itself, right? So you need to make sure that there's not just one person involved. These are all linked together, so that if this person goes on holidays, someone can step in and do all the operation run seamlessly. Okay, there's too many organizations out there where you got one or two key people that are responsible for everything. It's a disaster. I remember we were at a meeting years ago in West Limerick, and I was asking them all to introduce themselves. And one guy was on the chairperson of the board, and the next person said, "I'm the treasurer of the board, and I've been the treasurer since 1968." Right? You're like, going, okay, starting off like this guy being treasurer since 1968, no change. Like that's the point we're dealing with. I think this, where's your memos and articles association, where's the rotation of directors every 3 years? There's nothing in place. How would you even start to begin to look at dealing with an organization like that? And quickly transpired after 10 minutes into the meeting that everything was being directed by 3 people, and that was it, and everyone else was followed. It's mad. If you go back to the group I was talking about last week, the age profile, a lot of young people involved in it. Okay, very energetic. Some of them don't have any kids yet, which means they've got more time plans as well. And there's good age balance there, but bringing really energetic ideas to the table, and it's brilliant to work with them. And that's something that I'd also recommend you doing as well, is try and target people locally in your community that are younger, that want to get involved as well, and get them involved. And they will get involved if they feel they've got a role to play. They won't get involved in things like, say, fundraising. If they think they're going to be out there backpacking and all that, they won't do that. But use their skills, and get them involved in specific projects. Okay, so committees, as I said, I recommend at least 2 committees. The first being an executive. So the executive committee will be pretty much your now some groups have a finance committee and an executive committee, 2 separate ones. I kind of combine them because the same people anyway are involved probably. There's no point in having 5 people on two separate committees, the same 5 people. Just combine the work into one group. So they'll be responsible for finance and HR, because they're the most. If you've got staff, HR is important. If you don't have staff, then it's not important. But if you've got, say, an organization where you've got staff, people employed, have that executive responsible for finance and HR, because they're the most important things in terms of where things can go wrong. Okay, In other words, they're responsible for sign off on budgets, they're responsible for sign off on expenses, they're responsible for sign off on a financial report that's presented to the full board, but the full board don't have to go through that financial report in detail. At every board meeting, spend an hour going through, like, why do we spend, so much money on biscuits last month? We didn't spend much the month before, that kind of rubbish, And that's what happens at board meetings. So have that done outside of the board meeting and signed off on by finance committee. HR, again, very, very important that there's someone responsible for dealing with employment contracts, recruitment policies, and any disciplinary issues, okay? That cannot be left down to the coordinator manager on their own. They need to support from the board on that. That's where executive committee comes in play. Usually executive is the chairperson, the treasurer, secretary, and the coordinator. Okay, is what we would recommend. Fundraising committee, because an awful lot of you obviously are not-for-profit organizations, they're reliant on fundraising. It's a massive part of what you do. It's kind of the engine that kind of keeps the whole thing going. It's too important to have just done kind of on an ad hoc basis, and because it needs to be done annually and continuously throughout the year, you need to have a team responsible for it. I would compare a fundraising committee to being your sales team. If you're a company, your sales team out there selling for you, bringing in money in every single day. Your fundraising committee are people are bringing in the money every month into the organization, whether it be fundraising, sponsorship, grant aid. They're really it's really important that they're responsible for bringing the money in. There should be a specific team for it. So they're the two teams that I would recommend to have as minimum. Now, you might only have a small board of management, so that's what I'm saying. There's no point having 10 committees if the same people in every meeting. If it's only a couple of people, you'll be doing nearly everything on the one group anyway. But again, if you have more than one, it allows you to bring in additional people into the organization. So staffing is really only possible if you've got core grant aid. And what I mean by core grant aid is something might be funded through the Family Resource Centre, through TUSLA. Something might be funded through community service programs, through PUBL. Something might be funded under HSE Section 38 or 39 funding. And they provide funding towards the cost of employing staff to deliver services on the ground. So the CSP program is providing salaries for a manager and a number of employees. HSE is providing funding to employ people to deliver clinical services on the ground, or whether it be tutors or whatever it might be, or therapists or counsellors, or whatever. The Family Resource Centre, same, we provide funding towards staffing costs. If you don't have core funding like those, it's going to be very difficult for your organizations to raise the amount of money each year to keep people employed, because the biggest cost to any company, whether it be for-profit company or not-for-profit company, employment costs are really, really high. And just because you're employing someone in the not-for-profit sector or the community environment sector doesn't mean that the wages are really, really, really low. If you want someone good to work in a management position, you need to be paying them a good, attractive salary, right? There's no point paying someone stupid money, low money, because they're just not going to have the experience or skills. Yeah, you might save some money in terms of paying them, but you're going to gain nothing in terms of the person in the organization. The organization won't be driven on. So we, as I said to you last week, the first thing we would always say if we're hiring someone, not we, but if I'm working with a group that's hiring people, the first line of the job role should be that your job is to basically bring in funding that's going to pay your salary from now on. They need to be bringing in money, whether it be through they're freeing up time for others to bring money in, or they're developing the organization strategically that you can actually be in a position to avail of more grant aid down the line, or whatever it might be. But if they're just completely relying on core funding each year, if that funding is cut back, there's going to be no other money come in to replace them and pay them. Okay, so that's why I don't like using the word pilot projects, because pilot projects is we're in it for 2 years and we'll see how it goes, and then in the 2 years we have nothing in place to keep it going. If it's a pilot program, the whole purpose of a pilot program is at the end of the pilot is that you've got the structure in place and the resource in place, and you've access to additional funding to keep the thing going. Okay, it's only to get you off the ground. You need to get them off the ground. If there's no more fuel in the tank to stay off the ground, it's going to crash. So you don't wait till the pilots come to an end and say, okay, geez, we know we're running out of money. We need to look at how we're going to keep this thing going. You start from day one. How are we going to keep this thing going in 2 years' time? So we always talk to groups about what their sustainability plan is after the funding's over. How are you going to sustain this after the funding's over? What's the exit here? What are you going to do? We got to the edge of the cliff. Is there a bridge to carry over the rest of it? no, then you don't go any further. Employment schemes, use the RSS schemes, C schemes, 2 schemes. Difficult to recruit people on it. And I know that organizations at the moment are in very lot of difficulties in recruiting people through the schemes, a lot because of COVID, and just being before that was difficult as well. These are really good employment initiatives locally. There is issues around, sometimes you get people that are very, very good, and then because you got to move on, you lose them. Or in other cases, you get people in that are not very, very good, and you're stuck with them, being brutally honest. But again, look, I've been involved in organizations since 1998, and we've always been, any organization I've worked with directly, we've been reliant on employment schemes to keep the show on the road. And I would say 99% of the businesses I work with, in terms of not-for-profit businesses I work with, social enterprises, community volunteer organizations, are reliant on those schemes. Without them, this wouldn't happen. And they're constantly making changes to things. I know they've done a review of the social enterprise program, and hopefully they'll come up with a better program than the CSP program next year, and that will create opportunities as well to employ staff through the employment program. So again, just keep an eye on what's happening at national level in relation to employment supports, and seeing is there ways you can draw down grant aid to pay for staff. Again, I said use graduate placements, student placements where you can. Talk to the MTU, talk to KCFE, the Kerry Centre for Further Education, talk to the ETB around student placements, talk to TY students, talk to TY coordination in secondary schools. Look, they might have any experience, but they're able to do some work, they're able to give a hand, especially if you've got projects that are involved in new projects as well. Get young people involved in it. I worked with a very good organisation on a project up in Rathkeil called a Butterfly Club, and it was a group that was set up to provide respite for parents with kids with special needs, and all their not mentors, their support workers were young people, teenagers, and most of them were siblings of the young people with special needs, and the siblings' friends who wanted to get involved. They used to bring them swimming, they go doing football, they bring them on day trips, they used to have discos from Christmas parties, but it was all run by a team, obviously, but all the carers, or whatever word you want to use, were all young people between the ages of 15 and 18. An awful lot of them got involved in youth work afterwards, in childcare afterwards, because they loved working within that sector, worked in the disability sector afterwards. It was a really, really good project. But they identified, rather than going out there trying to find people, they identified people who would want to get involved, and it went straight to the siblings who wanted to get involved, who want to look after their brother or sister, and their friends want to look after them as well. So really good project. So sometimes people ignore, young people, they're a waste of time, and they won't get involved, and they won't do anything. A lot of them will. Some won't bother their asked to do anything, but a lot will if they're asked to do something that's worthwhile. We see it in the club. I'm involved with their young guys coming in, helping with coaching, 15, 16-year-olds, you see with the cool camps, it's all young people getting involved in it, so they will get involved. Volunteers have a recruitment strategy. Again, just think about who you want to get involved and why. Okay, you might say, well, sure, any volunteer is fantastic. The more, the better. You could be stuck with a lot of people who are just causing problems as well. And again, being brutally honest with you, what we've seen in other projects, for many, many years, there's people there, and just they're not being positive, they're being negative, they're just disturbing things, they're just causing problems, and they're very difficult to get rid of because they're not employed by you, so you can't fire them. And if they were employed, you probably couldn't fire them anyway. So have a recruitment strategy, like you recruit people that can bring skills, expertise to the table. Have a volunteer management policy in place as well, or volunteer coordinator policy in place. Make sure that all your volunteers are given adequate training, that they all sign up to the policies and procedures within the organization. Very, very important. A lot of people think because they're volunteers, they don't have the same responsibilities as employees. They do. Okay, because let's say, for example, this happened, not recently, but within the last 2 years anyway, where there was issues with an organization that we were doing some work with around social media, and stuff that's being posted on social media by a volunteer, and it wasn't on the actual organization's social media platforms; it was on their own private platforms, but they were tagged. So stuff going up that was tagged to, I don't understand social media, but it was tagged to the organization's platform. That organization has a childcare project within the structure. Part of what it did was provide childcare, and parents saw some of the stuff that was being posted by a volunteer. The volunteer said, "I'm only a volunteer. I wasn't made aware of this. I wasn't told of anything around social media. I wasn't told not to do certain things." There was no social media policy in place. There was for staff, but it wasn't extended to the volunteers. They weren't trained. They weren't told. No, bit of cop on you might think they shouldn't do it anyway, but they did. So make sure that your policies and procedures are covered. It covers your volunteers, and they're aware of them as well, and they sign up to them. So we would always encourage a induction process with your volunteers, and they're invited on the training where that training is required. Same as you invite your staff on the training. Things like manual handling, health and safety, they need to be trained in those things as well. They're part of your structure. Also talk to your insurance brokers around how your volunteers are covered by insurance. Again, a lot of organizations don't do that. So you've got volunteers out there doing stuff on the organization's behalf, which is, in some cases, might be a danger to them, or there's a risk to them getting injured or whatever it might be. That's insane. That's mad. You're wide open as an organization, okay? Make sure they're covered under all the policies and procedures. And then I said, in external voluntary support, as I mentioned, look for in-kind support from people that can bring key skills. You'll be hoping that they will come on board on committee structures and get involved in the organization on a more long-term basis, but certainly look at them. So finance, business skills, social media, marketing, legal, HR, facilitation. I wouldn't bring in volunteers to do things like mediation, okay? If there's issues within the organization, I wouldn't be bringing in HR people on a voluntary basis to do employment contracts or to provide you with any HR consultancy around, say, disciplinary issues. Certain things you've got to pay for, okay? Because if you don't pay for it, there's no accountability responsibility on that person's part. You also need to look at it from a professional perspective, from the consultant's perspective. If they're giving advice to you as well, are they covered under professional indemnity if they advise you if you're not being paid? Okay, so there's kind of a gray area there. But certainly when it comes to things like, say, mediation, where there's issues within an organization, pay someone to come in. Don't say, look, I know a friend of mine, he's a very good mediator. He or she'll do it as a favor. That doesn't work. This needs to be paid for, needs to be sorted, someone needs to be accountable. And the same with anything around HR. Obviously, with your annual returns in terms of finance, your accounts, that has to be done properly by an accountant. That would be done on a voluntary basis. But you, again, as I said, bring people in just to kind of give you some direction with certain things, okay, or some bit of advice. But anything that's serious around HR, legal, anything like that, certainly look to pay for something like that. A lot of groups at the moment as well are bringing in fundraisers, professional fundraisers to do their fundraising for them. That's fine too. There's nothing wrong with it. Just be careful with that it's very clear in terms of from your local people that are giving you money that they don't think that a large chunk of this money that we're donating is going to pay professionals to do it. So be very, very clear. Be very upfront around the fees that are being paid and so if you're trying to raise €30,000 and you're paying 10,000 for the fundraiser, your profit's €20,000. So you give them a percentage of what's going to go to the fundraiser, because word gets out there saying, oh, geez, they're paying some company up the country there loads of money to do this, and that's where money's going to. It's all big lights and everything else, and our money's not going to where it should be going to. That's very, very dangerous. Okay, so be very, very clear in terms of what their role is. But certainly, yeah, if you want to pay for professional fundraisers, most of the larger fundraisers are being done now by professionals anyway on behalf of organizations and being paid for. That's fine. Okay, and look, if any questions for me on any of this in terms of the structures, like mostly would have some or all of this in place anyway, but it's sometimes good to go back and review the structure in terms of, is this structure the best structure for the next year, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years to implement what we need to implement? Any questions on it?
Yeah, Tom, Connie here.
Hi, Connie.
Just there, I suppose the executive committee, I do feel at times that, when a decision needs to be made at short notice, even just like what we're dealing with at the minute, the red alert or crisis situations, that an executive committee is a good idea to have that in place. At least you're not waiting for the whole board then to
exactly
make a decision on something.
Yep. And it's also kind of important too that it's written into the actual Members Actors Association that the board have given the what's the word, I suppose, permission, or the, given that responsibility to the executive to make those decisions as well.
Yeah,
that's really important. That they're not going to, that there's confidence there with the other board members that look, the executive making a decision, they're free to make that decision, and they're they have the competence to make it as well, because it's things change so quickly. You can't be calling large board meetings to make decisions, but it's more where it really comes into play is the finance side of it. I've been on boards years ago where you're going through spreadsheet of finance, going, can someone just review this externally and tell us that we've seen it, we've no issue with it, and we, can we get a proposal in a second, or and just move on to the actual more stuff on the agenda here. People arguing about, where that money go to, and why didn't we do this, and why didn't we do that? Their board is there to govern and to be strategic, not to kind of, micromanage what's happening on a day-to-day basis within the organization. Yeah, they need to be made aware of stuff, but not the the minutiae detail. I don't know if Michael O'Leary's kind of attitude to management is if you're a head of a department, don't come to me saying there's a problem, saying we had a problem, we solved it. That's kind of attitude. That's the kind of executive's role here. Look, we had an issue. It was all done. It was all taken care of. We'll move on to the next thing now. And if you've got confidence, then in this, in some cases, there's boards out there who just don't, who want to be stuck in everything and want to be involved in everything and just don't want to delegate, and that's not good.
Yeah.
At all.
As well as that, I even see there now with the code of governance and the compliance check form and things like that. You have to unfortunately saturate your board members with all of that responsibility, but you have to give them the information as well. It is daunting for them, really. It is, and you need to support them. I'm not saying say you go to the board and say, there you go, sort this out yourselves. You need to give them some support with it, but what's happening more often than not, Connie, is that the boards come back saying to the coordinators, we've been told we have to do this, you often do it, you're being paid to do it. You're the ones being paid, we're the volunteers. That doesn't work. They need to do it, but they absolutely need to be supported on it. Yeah.
And in fairness too, there is a lot of support externally as well to help them with it.
Yeah.
I know the wheel and others do a lot of training on all that area, as well. Is there any other questions in relation to the structure or in relation to the putting together committees and teams for implementing different actions? Or does it all seem kind of over too complex?
Tom, I'd sort of chime in with Connie. We've what we call a working committee, so it's an executive committee, and that works really, really well. And I think it gives everyone a voice at the table from all the different groups without loading that into the board. So I find that works really well.
Yeah, it's really important. I think the key thing as well is that there's actually there is representative from the board there that's feeding that back to the wider board. For some, I know when I worked back in the local development sector, you had a number of different committees responsible for say enterprise, employment. There was one on grants, to be community development, to be different projects. But you'd hope to be at least one board member sitting in each committee that would feed that information back to the board. And that sometimes then frees up the time. If you've got a number of different committees, it frees up the coordinator's time, that the coordinator is not sitting on every committee, that there's maybe a board member sitting on one or two that are going to feed back to the board itself. But I think it came up last week, maybe with yourselves or maybe the Thursday night group, around communication. And that's really important too, that things are communicated to the board and communicated to the directors. So it's really important that you've got good internal communication structures as well, that we mentioned the last day, because there's nothing worse than there's a handful of people know what's going on, but the rest have no idea what's happening, and that's a very dangerous place to be with any organization, but certainly within the not-for-profit sector, because if it happens within a private company, it kind of stays within the company, creates problems within the company. But when it happens within the not-for-profit sector, it creates problems within the organization, but it creates major problems outside the organization, because then people are leaving the organization talking about how things are bad, talking about there's mass problems there, talking about these issues, that issues. That seeps down into the community, or we're going to be supporting you through funding or whatever it might be. But it also terrifies the life out of sponsors and the funders. They won't touch it. They don't want to be part of anything that's anyway negative at all, because they don't want to be dragged down with any of the bad publicity. Okay, so the next thing then we look at is funding. Now, with the financial side, there's a workshop next week, next Tuesday morning, next Thursday evening, I think it is, Caroline, on the financial planning, which takes this to the next level in terms of looking at your financial plan for 2022. But just because funding is a massive part of the action plan, because you're going to have to finance it and you have to resource it. But we talked about resourcing it through structures and staff, etc. You're now going to look at resourcing through funding. And the funding really you need to identify is your operational costs for the year. So what are your ongoing funding requirements? Are they increasing? Yes, they absolutely are, because costs are certainly gone through the bloody roof, and they're groups that were paying money last year for oil and heat were now probably going to be paying 30% more. And that's a big cost. So all costs are going up, insurance costs are going up, everything else is going up. So look what the ongoing funding requirements are. Have a reserve policy. I've got the kind of the phrase I use with organizations when I'm asked about funding. And it's something that I suppose my background is working with social enterprises. So it's about, driving the economic part of the business to bring in money that runs the social element of it. But it's always focused on how you bring in more and more money to keep the good things going and expand and develop them. And that's what primarily I work with groups on is looking at those funding sources. So I remember we had a meeting with, I won't say what agency, just in case. And we had a bit of an argument, myself and a manager group I was working for. And we sat down with the people who were responsible for funding the organization. And we were putting our best case forward in terms of, why they should fund us. And they were going to consider their notes. And they said, we've noticed here that you got substantial funding already from another organization. And I was going, yeah. And I said, but you're a not-for-profit organization. You're very much focused on how you will make more money. And I said to them, stop you right there. I said, we're a not-for-profit organization, but we're also a not-for-loss organization. Okay. So if we make a profit, we don't go off and give that profit as dividends to our directors. We don't go down to and invest it in stocks and shares. We don't have a big party. We put it back into the project and we invest back into the project. Like every not-for-profit organization is supposed to do is reinvest any profits it makes back into the organization. So my job was to maximize the amount of profit they made. And profit is not, everything's profit is like, oh, you made a profit. Profit is your net income. You've got more income than you have expenditure. That's all that is. Okay, I call it profit because that's what it is, but most people will say we've got surplus income. So that income might come in from fundraisers, plus grants, plus everything else. It doesn't matter. You could have €1 million surplus income. Who cares? It's all going back into developing the projects anyway. So we always look at having reserve policy. Just don't be this kind of organization who's like going, we needed €50,000 to break even. I hate the word break even, whether it be in private companies or not-for-profit companies. Because if you're 1 cent below the break-even point, you're making a loss. Now you got a problem. Okay? So you want to be outside the comfort zone of break-even. You want to be in surplus territory. You want to be able to kind of go to bed at night time thinking, Chris, we can keep the lights on now next week because we have money in the account. Rather than thinking, how are we going to fund this thing? I've seen directors put their hand in their pocket and put their own money into an organization just to keep it afloat because they work on a break-even policy. Drive revenue into the business, into the organization, drive it in. Okay. If you've got a situation where the regulator is saying you've got too much money in your account, you've got too much reserves, we're questioning your charitable status. If you've got revenue saying you've got too much money, if you've got other organizations that are funding saying you've got too much money in your accounts because they can see your accounts, they can see your balance sheets, have a reserve policy. Your accountant should have a reserve policy written into your financial returns, into your annual returns. And your reserve policy should focus on 2 key things. One is to have depends on your funders. In Pubble, if you've got a CSP project, you have to have 13 weeks minimum operational costs in reserve to keep the show on the road if things go wrong. I would say 13 weeks isn't enough of reserve. You should have 6 months. 13 weeks, what, 3 months? 3 months to steady the ship and get funding back in and keep the whole thing going. Too short time, way too short time. You're not going to, it's not like you can go out and sell more tomorrow morning or work harder to make more money. It's not a private business. You got to find the money from somewhere to bring it in. So give yourself 6 months. So that's 6 months insurance, 6 months light and heat, 6 months staffing, 6 months everything. Okay. You might have reserve policy for if it's a building project, a sinking fund to repair and maintain the building or to extend the building. You might have a project long-term you want to put money into, like an extension project. It might be purchasing transport, purchasing new equipment, whatever it might be. It might be reserve policy to hire more staff. So again, whatever that is, make sure that your accountant has written that reserve policy into the actual accounts. So now you can explain why you have a reserve sitting there, whatever it is, a couple of €1,000 or a couple of €100,000, doesn't matter what it is, but it has to be an explanation as to why it's sitting there. Okay, otherwise they'll question should they fund you. Project analysis, then there's funding for that. So you might want to develop projects where it's going to be cost to get people involved. For example, if you're doing a capital project, you're going to have to get architects involved. They're costly. If you want to get planning permission, it is costly. Again, so there's a cost in getting the project started. And that's where this feasibility study funding will come in. And you got project development costs, right? So this is capital funding. So a lot of organizations don't have any of this. They just have operational costs. They just do the same thing over and over and over again, keep the show on the road, provide a good service in their local community, and they have no intention of developing big projects or expanding the projects. Other groups then would have these operational costs to deal with, and then there was separate capital funding. One of the most important things that I try to get across to my groups I'm dealing with is, do not start combining your capital funding requirements or your project costs into your operational costs. Okay, because what happened there is you start subsidizing your development costs with your ongoing operational costs. Okay, so for example, if you take your household budget, okay, and you decide it costs us whatever every month to run the house, pay the mortgage, pay for food, pay for utilities, keep the kids fed, keep the kids clothed, all this sort of stuff, right? And you've got to get a set target every month that you need to bring in, and you got money coming in through salaries to pay for that budget every single month. And then you decide, right, what we're going to do is we're going to build an extension, and we're going to borrow money to build the extension to the house. Okay, but we can't really afford it, but we'll borrow it, right? What happens in the borrowings that need to be repaid to the bank now become part of the operational cost, okay, of running the house, and now that's got to be subsidized from somewhere else. So somewhere's got to, you're going to lose out somewhere else within the house to cover the cost of the loan. So you stop going out. Meals, the holidays going every year is gone. Santa's, downsized completely every Christmas. All those things happen because you're now subsidizing the new project with existing operational costs. That's the analogy I'm using. Take your not-for-profit organization. If you're going out there and you're funding your projects, and a lot of it could be through debt finance, through lending, you're now adding another repayment onto your operational costs. Okay, so if you're at break even, you add on lending onto that, you're now in serious trouble. Okay, if you're developing a project like a capital building project, and it's going to increase your costs in terms of running costs, like your insurance is going to go up, your utility costs are going to go up, plus you might have a loan to pay off on it. Now you're seriously impacting your operational costs. Okay, so the point I'm getting to is this: you can try to fund your capital project externally from your main funding, right? So if you're fundraising every year to keep the show on the road, keep the organization going, you need to look at a separate fundraising strategy for the specific project, for the project you're trying to develop. It's a standalone project, okay? And you're going to other people to fund it. So you're not going back to your sponsor who gives you money every year for the operation costs, saying, look, we need more money now to do the building project. Keep it separate. Where are you going to have a situation where you're borrowing money for it? You need to look at how we're going to repay that loan. How are we going to repay this loan every year? Okay, so we're doing a project at the moment with a club locally, and I'm on their project team, and I said to them, look, if you borrow substantial funding here for this project, a way of repaying that loan every year, let's say the loan repayments are 40 grand a year, let's say, for example. No, that's just an example. What I'd be doing is saying, okay, can we find 40 companies locally that will give us €1,000 per year sponsor, right, for that specific project? And we get them in 3-year partnership deals. So now coming in as board is 3 years, €1,000 a year for 3 years, right? 40 of them. That covers repayments for the next 3 years, and then we go back and we look for next 3 years. It's a 5-year loan, so next 2 years, how do we get 40 other companies come in for 2 more years to pay us that? If that's ring fenced for the capital funding, repayments and loan, it's not going to impact on the operational costs. You're not going to start drawing money from running the club to pay the loan repayment. Does that make sense? Where a lot of groups do, should we just go back into our pot and we'll go back to reserves, we use the reserves to fund this. Now the reserves are gone. We take our operational costs to pay off the loan. Now your operation costs are down, so you can't spend money on certain things you won't spend before. Keep it separate, okay? Don't develop projects that, unless you've identified a clear source of funding to get them off the ground, or a source of funding that's going to help with repayments if you're borrowing money for it afterwards, okay? It's like, as I said, your household situation, you're not going to go out and buy a brand new Mercedes tomorrow morning and you'd love to do it, you can't afford to do it. You just won't do it. It'd be insane. Why would you do it then for an organization? Never start something unless you know you can fund it separately, independently of your operational costs. So your core funding in that your budget. This one again, a simple cash flow budget, and again I'm going to be going through this in way more detail next week. Again, use something like this simple spreadsheet and start off with expenses. Work out what it is per month you're spending on all these things. There's only a handful of examples here, but write down you'd have from your previous accounts anyway. And look at what months are fairly busy in terms of, there's high costs going out. So some groups maybe have their insurance repayments once a year. They might pay 3,000 or 4,000 euros in insurance, and it's a one-off payment. That's a big hit in your cash flow for that month. Look, can you spread it out over a number of months? So reduce the impact on your cash flow. See, can you make some savings on things like utilities? Shop around. Professional fees, shop around. Rent. Look for maybe, if you're renting, can you get discounts from your landlord? Can you get breaks on rent? COVID, for example, can you get breaks? You're not going to be based there. And your staffing costs, whatever it is you're spending every year, write down. Don't do like an annual total. We spend 40 grand a year on staffing. Break it down month by month, okay? Because you want to see when there's going to be months there that there's going to be more money going out, that you have the money coming in. And that's really important because, again, if it's a household budget, that December, where we're here, December, it's a busy month for stuff to go out, that you got, a lot of expenses. You don't want your oil to run out the first week in December. I got to refill the tank of oil. You're going to, geez, we got, all the other costs. Now we got this land on top of us as well. That's just bad planning. So, you look at, some of the quieter months to maybe start filling the tank of oil. So it's done then before December. You don't have your insurance renewals come up in December. All these things. So you just kind of like naturally, as a household budget, you kind of plan ahead in terms of when do we need to have a lot of money in the account, when there's going to be times where we can spread things out. Okay. Same with your organization. And this goes back to simple. This doesn't require you to be accountants. This is a simple writing things down on a calendar, on a chart like this, on a template like this, or an Excel spreadsheet like this, and see, okay, what's going out and when do we need to bring the money in. Okay. If you've got a big project in, say, September that you want to run with, you don't start fundraising in July for it. If you're doing a golf classic as a fundraising, you're not going to run a golf classic in January. You're not going to run a golf classic in Tralee Golf Club today, for example, right, in December. So you think, okay, when's the best time of year to do it? When's the most practical time of year to do it? So it's just planning. Again, when's the best time to go to sponsors? I'd be going to them when they're doing a tax return. If they want to reduce their tax liability, if they give you money, they can put that down as marketing, as sponsorship. They reduce their tax liability by, if they're a sole trader, either 20% or 40%. Okay, so let's say their net income is 10,000 euros and they want to bring that down to reduce their tax liability on that. If you give 1,000 euros, that brings it down to 9,000 euros if they're getting 20% of it back really in tax savings. So that's when you hit them. Or you hit them maybe in November if they're planning their financial year and say, okay, we want you to be our main sponsor for next year. Okay, it gives them the opportunity to now sign up their main sponsor. Their partner for next year is the following. Okay, so it's tied into their budget. Again, and you just talk to company executives about when is the best time to go and talk to them about when do they do their financial planning. If it's October, go to them in October. Tie these things in. So again, it's all about planning. So the source of funds. Sorry, in terms of a capital project. Again, a lot of people underestimate the costs involved in these things. And it's eye-watering, the costs are involved in construction projects at the moment. And a lot of groups just running very, very fast away from them because they're just on crazy, crazy prices. If you're doing a building project, sorry, you might think it's going, what's going to cost to build the building. Before the building happens, you're going to have professional fees for construction drawings, QS costings, and planning fees. Okay, that can cost whatever, depends on the size of the project, but can be fairly substantial. We did a job in Limerick for a tennis club, and these costs alone, and this was relatively inexpensive for the size of the project that was involved. These costs alone came in at 19 grand. That's before anything was put in, built or bought or anything, right? We did a project back in two projects back in West Kerry. One was Dingle Hospital feasibility study, and one was a study back in Ballyferter. Both of those projects secured funding under Category 2 RDF funding. For one was roughly, kind of exact figures, about 300,000 euros. The other was about 350,000 euros. That was just for planning and master plans for the building, not to build it. Substantial funding, right? Professional fees, if you're going doing building works now, construction costs are very, very high. Fit out costs are getting very, very high. You've also got professional fees on top of this. So if you're doing a building project now as a community project, not-for-profit organization, and you're following all building regulations, you're going to have to have an architect or engineer to come in and sign off and supervise the project. The professional fees that you're assigned to any construction project at the moment is 10% of the overall construction costs. So if you're looking at a €1 million project, you're talking about 100,000 of that is going to be professional fees. Okay, it's nuts, it's crazy stuff. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with at the moment. You might say, but sure, you don't need them. You do, because it's publicly funded. You have to have everything signed off on, and building regulations and everything else. There's no real, with a private company, that you would cut corners, but you don't have to go to the same level of scrutiny as a not-for-profit organization with public funds would have to go through. So, for example, if you're a private company, you don't have to go through a tendering process because it's not publicly funded. If you're not-for-profit and you're publicly funded, you got to go through a tendering process. You can't do that process yourselves. You got to get someone to do for you, because they need construction pack, they need QS figures, they need all this. That costs an awful lot of money. So there's an awful lot of cost there before anything happens in terms of building work. So again, just bear in mind, where's that money going to come from? Okay, so again, a lot of people underestimate the costs of running projects and starting projects. When they get into the rise, the costs are there. Have a chat with someone like myself, an architect or engineer, and ask them, what's the real costs of getting involved in a building project? And if you feel this is way beyond us in terms of what we can do, just don't do it. Okay, unless you know there's funding out there to help you with it. So then the sources of funding. There is, and again, I'm going through this in more detail next week. You got fee income. So very first thing we look at is how we can bring money into the business and the organization through fees. Could be for services you provide, could be for products like a charity shop. A lot of organizations now have charity shops alongside that generate revenue to keep the social side of the business going. You might have facilities, so rental of facilities, meeting hire, hall hire, that kind of stuff. You might have membership base. Again, it's an area that a lot of groups don't look at. It's an area you should look at. How we can, it's like a friends out type thing, but you kind of have it more structured as a membership. So they sign up to be members of the organization and they pay an annual membership fee. Now you've got to look at what you can give them for that membership fee in return. I know there's one or two groups that have, say, sports facilities like Astroturf Pitch. They'll give, like, say, corporate membership, and that gets them then kind of a discount then on renting the facilities when they want to use it. So they get maybe 20% discount or something, but it brings in annual revenue, guaranteed revenue. Then you got one-off grants, which are like COVID last year, the last 20 months or more. There's a load of one-off grants. Like, there's an awful lot of people out there, an awful lot of PPE and screens and tablets and technology, because there was tons of grants out there for it, and which was fantastic. But they're all one-off grants that you got the money and you spent it and you moved on. They become back in again now because of where we're at. Again, next year more one-off grants will be out there. You've got one-off grants that are annual one-off grants, so they come up each year. So, like, say, sports capital funding for sports groups, they're one-off, but they're announced each year. So they're not ongoing grants you guaranteed to get every single time. They're one-off that you can apply for every time, but you're not guaranteed to get them. Core grants are your Section 39, Section 38, your CSP funding, your PUBL funding, your TUSLA funding that are there every year. You got to go back and submit returns and submit, business plans, and with Section 39 funding, you got to submit service level agreements every year to them, and reporting. But it's pretty much, I won't say it's guaranteed because you have to do certain things to get it, but once you're doing what you're supposed to and you're doing everything right, you can access that funding each year. Don't become overly reliant on it, because if you do, and if it's pulled, you're in trouble. Okay, but it is any organization that's core funded is in a way better position than any group that's not. Fundraising, your traditional fundraising that we all are familiar with and got involved in, and you've got your online fundraising, which now is a big thing for groups because of COVID, but it's a huge opportunity for organizations to start looking at more. And again, I'll cover this in way more detail in the financial planning session. Sponsors and partners, completely underutilized by most organizations, right? Very, very rarely used. And I don't understand why, because companies want to give something back. In some cases, they got a CSR responsibility, so they have to give something back. But local companies and businesses want to get involved in local projects that are meaningful projects, right? For two reasons. One, because it's goodwill. It's a marketing value to them. There's a PR value to it as well, that they're supporting something local that a lot of people are involved in, a lot of people are happy about, a lot of people think it's provided, they're a great cause, great organization, and they want to be part of it. And the other reason is because they've got a connection with that organization, right? So whether it be cancer support, or whether it be a club that they played for themselves, or whether it be a school they went to, when they're national school or secondary school, they have a personal connection with the organization and what it does. Okay. For example, I wouldn't have gotten involved in our national school 7 years ago because we didn't have kids going there. Okay. But now we get involved in that school in terms of we have fundraise, we get, we donate money in terms of different things, we get involved in different projects with them because our kids are going there. And anything that benefits the school would benefit our kids. No, when they move out of national school, I'd probably no more to do with them after that. Right? But they move on to secondary school, you will start now supporting the secondary school because your kids are benefiting from it. And we all do this. So you look for that connection there, right, with your sponsors. And I break those sponsors into two. There's sponsors and there's partners. Sponsors normally kind of one-off. We'll sponsor this event, or we sponsor this program, or we sponsor whatever it might be. Okay. Partners are different. Partners are there in the long-term kind of long haul with you. They're partnering with you. They're in, like, say, longer-term partnership agreements with you in terms of funding supports. And that's really where you get your organization to say, our chosen charity partner this year is whoever. Okay. Now they're partnering with them maybe over 1 year or maybe over a longer period of time. That's really important. And you don't have many of these because you're not going to get loads of partners on board, because then it just dilutes their value in it. So you split them out. Partners are longer term, usually 3-year partnership deals, and then sponsors are one-off that you go back to when you want to do kind of one-off small events or whatever it might be. Donors, again, are separate. Donors will be people who are donating money to you on a large scale. It could be through will, it could be through again, we've seen a lot of organizations where their parent or family member was being well looked after by an organization, and they were delighted with the support and help that person got before they died or whatever. And then afterwards, look, we want to donate money to your organization. We don't want any recognition for it. We want to give you a silent donor. Philanthropy, again, there's plenty of them out there, nationally and internationally. I suppose the one that'd be most well known, I suppose, in Limerick mostly would be JP Manus Foundation, which is a philanthropic organization. You've got the Ireland's funds, you've got a few more out there as well. Then you got loans. And like loans, people think, I'm not going to go near a loan, If you're getting grant aid, you have to borrow the money first to pay the money out, to draw down the grant. So you've no option, unless you got reserves sitting there, and that you're going to use the reserves and then draw down the grant. But in majority cases, probably 9 times out of 10, groups are borrowing the money to pay the grant, pay the fees, and then draw down the grants and then get reimbursed. So the social loans that are available in Ireland are Clan-Credo. Good thing about Clan-Credo is that Sarah Lee, who's from Causeway, only over the road here, is the development officer for these areas. So you're dealing with someone local that knows local projects and knows the local area, as opposed to dealing from someone outside the Kerry that you have to kind of explain, what we're doing and what we're about. So Sarah is good. She's worked with a lot of groups I work with on getting them funding. You got Community Finance Ireland as well in terms of providing social loans. They pretty much do the same thing. There are social banks. The benefit of going to a social bank as opposed to a commercial bank is they won't look for directors' guarantees. So your directors of your voluntary directors won't be signing their name to and go and guarantee on any loans that the organisation has, nor should they ever do, but commercial banks will look for that. Their interest rates, they're similar pretty much to the banks, but their focus is on supporting social projects. They do a specific type of loans for things like sports capital. They have a sports capital loan that provides bridging loans for sports clubs that are drawn down sports capital grants. They will provide bridging loans for leader grants as well, because they know that money's coming back in. But just be careful if you're borrowing money to bridge finance a grant. It could take up to 2-3 months to draw down that grant. So just be aware of that. You could be repaying a loan for more than you think, because you won't. If you pay out a consultant a fee, and you win the next day to leader to say, okay, here's the invoice, here's the receipt, here's the report that was done by him, here's his tax clearance certificate, here's insurance, here's our bank statement, here's a letter from our accountant, and all the other paperwork to look for. They won't say, here's a check. It might take a whole more series of jumps and hoops to go through to draw down the grant. That could take time. And with COVID, it's taken a lot longer than it should do. So again, you might have repayments there that are going out longer than you think you're going to have. You can look for commercial loans. I know the credit union have given loans out to community projects in the past and still do. And banks will, AIB, Bank of Ireland, Ulster Bank, all of them, they'll all give out commercial loans on the basis that you can show repayment capacity. If you can show repayment capacity, then you should be okay. They will look for directors' guarantees. That's a problem. No voluntary director should be asked to guarantee a loan for their organisation they're working with on a voluntary capacity. So that's why most people will go the social loan route rather than the commercial banks. And then the last thing is in-kind contributions. Look, again, it's something that's overlooked. Rather than paying for something, you can get it for free. You're in job with a recreational park, and they come back with these things they want to buy, and they've asked me, can I get a grant for it? I'm like, going, why would they say if you're putting a seat in a park, a recycled plastic bin in a park, rather than having to raise money for it, would you not say to someone locally, can you sponsor the seat? And you put a plaque saying this seat was sponsored by O'Leary and Associates, for example, right? You're going to put in the flower bed, go to your local garden centre, can you sponsor the flower bed? Can you give us the bedding plants, we'll put in the flowers and they're voluntary, we put in whatever these be, and say this flower bed was sponsored by whoever it is. If you need a microwave for your kitchen, go down to Harvey Norman's and say, can you give us a microwave for your kitchen? You know, if they do, you go to so-and-so and say, or Harvey Norman's give us a microwave, can you give us a Burko boiler? You know, right? If they haven't, lie and say they gave it to us anyway. Or Harvey's gave us a microwave there, can you give us this? Then you go back to Harvey Norman and say, they want to give us a Burko boiler, can you give us a microwave? You know, small few white lies like that. I know groups that have gone, they've got, transport providers. They've gone to local, filling stations, Apple Green, whatever, and said, can we sponsor maybe the diesel for 3 months? I know of groups who've gone to, sports equipment companies saying, look, we need sports equipment. Have you any stock that's come back in? Jerseys that weren't collected, that you given to us, just to ask. People don't ask for things. It's crazy, I know of a project local in Tralee, not to mention, I know that all the seats they got for their hall were donated. As the person asked for it. I know groups who go up to the colleges, they go to schools, they go to different places. If they're throwing on any old desks, not given to us, we'll use them. Anything you can get for free, get it. We're dealing with a group up the country who are putting in a playground. They don't have any money. They don't want to raise 100,000 euros to put in a playground. They've gone to all the local builder providers. They've got materials. They've gone to local people that have machinery. They got them in voluntary basis. They got the local school involved. They got local people involved, and they're building the playground themselves with materials that are donated by local people. It's easy to do it. Well, it's not easy to do, but it's a lot easier than maybe spending months fundraising something, and people want to give their time. I know one guy. He said to me, because I talked to him, the guy who's doing the grounds work for this group. He said, I'd rather spend the day in my digger leveling the ground for them than spending the day backpacking in Dunnes Stores. It's equivalent to a couple €100 for the day in getting it done voluntary. And because he's from the local area, he wants to do right because he don't want to be blamed afterwards for wrong. So he's not going to make sure it's done right. It's just using simple things that where rather than look for money the whole time, look for contributions. Get the local schools involved. I know loads of estates got local schools involved in planting days. Rather than spending a fortune getting someone going to do planting, the school do it. And then you go to school, you go to the people providing the plants and say, look, we've had loads of kids from national school. The poor thing's going to be out there now in all conditions planting. Can you provide the plants for free? And we'll recognise you and thank you for it. So whatever it is, just ask for it. I was working in a group one time. They were looking for, it was a €2,000, I think it was, for to bring in a painter to paint one of their spaces within their building. I'm like, well, surely there's someone, if you got three people locally that would just do this, spend their Saturday doing it for you, and go down to local builders provider and say, look, you can donate some paint, stuff that maybe was damaged, things that you can't sell. It doesn't matter what color it is, give it to us. And they did. They went off and they saved themselves €2,000. It's just all those sort of things you can do. So when you look at the source of funding, again, plan ahead, think about it. Can we find funding for it? If we can't, is there no way of doing it? Okay. If there's no other way of doing it, then you just don't progress. But you take that action off the action plan. Okay. Really, really important. Because you progress with actions that you can't support or fund a resource, it's a waste of time. Okay. So, as I said, we're going to have more of this on the workshop next week on the financial planning side of it. And we'll go into a bit more detail in terms of kind of elaborating more on these different types of funds. So I'll stop the share now because that's the last slide. Any questions on that? Does it make sense to you, or is it kind of like, oh my God, there's loads of work involved in all this? Anyone?
I suppose there, Brian, even I'm just writing down here, businesses that we would be purchasing produce from on an annual basis, and we haven't really tapped into them. And then more businesses that actually donate to us on an annual basis, even without us asking them,
Yep,
because
absolutely.
they know our work and they know the work that we do as well.
Yep.
But, I think we definitely need to rattle the bucket a little bit more.
Yep.
I'd say if any of the local businesses and suppliers were here to hear you, they would say, oh, good God, we'll be inundated.
Yeah, but it's true, because I give an example of it. It's a real quick example. My mother worked for the Alzheimer's Centre in Tralee for years there as kind of, I suppose, helper. And they used to have their annual, the tea day they used to have to fundraise. So they went to a local shop. Well, not going to name the shop, obviously, but they went to a local shop. They used to go to pretty much every second day to get all the milk, sugar, stuff for the, stuff to get for the daycare centre. And they went and asked them, would you mind? And my mother was embarrassed going and asking for something because, she didn't want to, but she said, look, would you mind giving us something towards our fundraiser? And he took out €5 out of the till and handed it to her, right? And she was like, she nearly just started crying. She was mortified and disgusted. So she went back and, of course, told everyone he gave us a $5. And they literally boycotted the shop. And they never went back to the shop ever again. Yeah. Now this idiot, and that's what he was, if that was anyone with an ounce of common sense, would say, okay, these people come back every single week. Not even at that, they never came into the shop. The fact that we're doing this work for a really good cause. You would have said, okay, here's a box of stuff for your fundraiser. Here's a hamper. Here's money. Here's whatever you need, right? I'll come down and help you do it if you want to, because there's goodwill there and it comes back to you. And it just baffles me that business people don't cop that they don't see, well, it's the cost and it's going to cost me money and I'm not going to give anything free because there's nothing for me. There's thousands back in return. Thousands back. That's what I'm saying. People come to me saying, Tom, you did work there last year for us. I don't charge them for it because, one, they gave me money before for it, and secondly, because online they want to say, well, fair play to me, come in, help us out when we needed them. We'll use them again. I don't do that on the basis of getting more business, but I do that because they're good groups I work with. I like giving something back to them because they do really good work. And what I do is a tiny percentage of what they do every single day. So use that, you know, but if you've got suppliers, Connie, you said, and you might have, like, say, an oil company, I'm just picking out that random there, right? But you might be spending an absolute fortune on oil every year, which you might, you know, probably are. You go to them and say, okay, we're giving you X amount every year here. Can you give something back? You shouldn't have to ask for it, but sometimes you have to, you know, and use them. If they think, well, if we're getting, you know, let's say 10 grand a year off this stuff, looking for thousands. If we give it to them, we're getting that guarantee 10,000 every year. So it's kind of like you're spending 1,000 to get guaranteed multiples of that every year. You know, makes sense, doesn't it?
Yep, definitely.
It's like, you know, people say, oh, I'm not going to sponsor, no, but then they go down and spend maybe 500 euros on a small ad that's in the paper 1 week and get no return out of it. Whereas, you know, if you had, am I broke up there? Can you hear me?
A little bit. Yeah.
Okay, I think the storm is starting to do its damage now.
Yeah.
We've been so lucky.
My mast outside is like that. So, look, is there any questions there? I can wrap up because it's probably going to go down. Are you okay with everything?
No,
Lovely.
much,
Thanks
Tom.
very much.
So-
And I put the dates into the chat box there just for the financial. Again, we've 2 options next week on the 10 to 12 on the Tuesday, or else if it suits people on the Wednesday evening 7 to 9. So we're trying to facilitate all. So thanks a million, Tom.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate it. And I'll send on the slides, Caroline, again to yourself later on, and the other templates I'll have as well.
Lovely stuff. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million. Appreciate it. Take care. Mind yourselves.
Thanks very
Tom.
much.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.